Welcome to the Entrada Institute and our evening conversation with distinguished Utah artists. My name is Mary McConnell. I am a member of the board of the Entrada Institute, and I will tell you that I'm entirely devoid of artistic talent, except perhaps garden design, which I love. But I did teach AP Art History in a Utah high school for many years, and so I have inflicted a great deal of art on students, many of whom are more artistically talented than I am. Just a few business things before we get started meeting our artists. First of all, this entire program is online, I believe, with Facebook, and you are welcome to make comments or ask questions. Just enter them in to the text box provided. We'd love that. We also, of course, always welcome contributions to the Entrada Institute, which you can do at entrada.org. And finally, our wonderful Arts in the Park event will finish tomorrow evening with a celebration at Place Cidery. There will be good food and drinks and interesting things to see. And again, you can register for tickets on entrada.org. All right. So we have 3 artists that I'll be interviewing, and I'm hoping actually not to make a major statement here because, as I've already indicated, I do not, in fact, bring anything artistic to the table other than years of inflicting other people's art on hapless high school students. And by the way, I want to shout out to my co-teacher in this class. Vanessa Jacobs is visiting from Salt Lake City and is here with her daughter. We'll be hiking tomorrow. So our first artist, you know what, I'm going to ask you to pronounce your name properly so that I don't blow it.
My whole name is Niles Hagemann.
Vallejo. Is that after Vallejo in California?
Yes, it is.
That is great.
It's a great relative of mine.
Okay. So, Niles' website, which is easily found on the internet, is an absolute gold mine of fascinating quotations, which I intend to mine myself so that you do more talking than I do. So I was going to start out. Let me back up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your connection with this area and how you ended up in this neck of the woods?
Good, yes. So back in the 70s, I lived in Castle Valley behind Moab, raised my family, built a house, raised my family, and was a river runner. And but I had a lot of friends that were wandering desert wanderers that lived over in Boulder, Utah. So I would come out. Sometimes I would hitchhike on the Burr Trail before it was paved, and got a ride with an old cowboy that had his cows in Boulder, and that's how I started to learn about this area. And then years after that, so that's been 45 years I've been coming to here to meet up with my friends. And then I hired on with Aspen Achievement Academy, which is a wilderness recovery outfit, and that was 20 years ago at least. And that's where I fell in love with this land, because you actually have to trudge the road of happy destiny across the whole desert, and they try to avoid roads. It was patterned after the Mormon pioneers pushing hand carts, so we had the kids pushing hand carts to toughen them up, I guess. And that's where I started to really get a feel for this land. And also I would come down here to paint. And then I lived in Salt Lake for quite a number of years and would always come back here to rejuvenate. And so 10 years ago, my wife and I moved into the Bicknell Bottoms. We have a little farm, and I have a wood shop, and we are wilderness guides. We take people out and we work with them out in the wilderness, and that's part of how my artwork is informed by doing rites of passage work.
Well, actually, you speak on your website quite a bit about the influence of dreams and some encounters you've had. And a comment that I made when we were meeting earlier is that as I taught art history to students, much art of different cultures, often non-Western cultures, but for instance, an example of this are the great cave paintings of Spain and France. The current theory, and there are lots of theories about these paintings, and they come and go in fashion, but one of them is that they were expressions of shamanistic relationships with ancestors to bring on good hunts or success. And I think those kinds of visions or ideas have influenced your art. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? I found that very interesting.
Yeah, my understanding of old-time art was that it was for sacred purposes and used in ceremony. It wasn't for gain or show. So when I see a big panel of pictographs, then I recognize my kin. And so for me, art is not something separate from my life. Cezanne, he said artist's work is to make a life, a rich life. And so for me, everything that I paint has a story behind it, a place that's either had some sacred event happen or places that I've spent time in, had experiences in.
So we have a couple of your paintings right here. Can you tell us? There's a great Damon Runyon short story, A Story Goes With It. So I bet a story goes with it. Maybe you could give us some indication.
This is looking out our living room window, east from the Bicknell Bottoms, looking right down the Fremont River as it winds its way towards the Colorado River eventually. And the Fremont River, the headwaters to the Fremont, is way at the top of Fish Lake Mountain. And I've walked every inch of the Fremont drainage. It's nice to know your drainages, where your water comes from. But we irrigate with the water that ends up in the Fremont River. And then behind me is looking out living room window right across the valley to where the kind of the Sunglow campground is. And I really love rainbows when they happen. And a lot of times I'll paint rainbows, but I'll get the colors mixed up of which combination. But it's just the love of my place. And I've walked all through in that country too. I've walked all in this country. So I'm very familiar with it. And it's embedded, landscape is embedded in me now. I don't even have to go there to paint it. It's just been years.
So I'm going to take advantage of a teaching moment here. I don't suppose any of my students are listening to this, but I would struggle. They found the term, I should say, painterly. Very confusing. But I noticed that you say on your website, I paint with a loose, thick, painterly colorist style. So, in the interest of our listeners particularly, why don't you explain what that means? Maybe because I'll bet you're going to do a much better job of it than I ever did.
I learned the term painterly realism, and it's sort of applied because painterly means you have a lot of gesture, maybe thick paint, and you're slopping it around, so you're indicating something that's real, like nature, but you're expressing, you're an expressionist when you're painting that way. And the colorist part is, the colorists, they jumped out of these older tonal paintings that were kind of drear. So the colorists just started saying, hey, let's start adding that element. And I really love to work with color, but I also like it to match what I'm seeing. But then I'll exaggerate. I'll take out my poetic license and push it a little bit. But I like it to come right from what I'm looking at. And so some colorists, like you mentioned Durand.
Yeah, it's a favorite of mine.
Yeah, and he could pull off a painting like with 3 blocks of color that would just drive me crazy.
Well, as I said, I can admire it. I can't do it, but I love people who can. So something else you said, I thought, I mean, you put too many things on your website because you just create lots of interesting material, and I was genuinely curious. I'd love to have you come speak to a classroom. So you made a comment on your website that art is an expression of a code of indebtedness, which I thought was very interesting.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
And that comes from my beloved teacher, Martine Prechtel, who had lived in an indigenous way for many years, grew up on San Juan Pueblo area in northern New Mexico. And the indigenous way of looking at the world is that we're given our life, everything. And so instead of, I think maybe buying stuff at Walmart's a good example. You don't know where it came from, you don't know who made it. But if you start making stuff yourself, you realize that you're in relationship to, let's say, the animal hide that you got or the wood that you got to build something. And the more you know the origins of things, the more you start being in a relationship of indebtedness. We'll never be able to pay the debt back of our lives. Abundance, and so that relationship of indebtedness is a key factor of how you can take care of each other, especially enemies. And I find that I just take that teaching from Martine and apply it because I live it now. And so for everything that I take, I try and give something back. I give an offering back. If I wanna make a garden, then I have to ask that piece of land if it took permission to change it. And then so that kind of reciprocal relationship and also courtship is courting the things that we use, and I don't want to take anything for granted anymore. So even knowing the drainages of where our irrigation water comes from is a form of indebtedness, because I'll walk the land, I'll make something and offer it to the springs. It's a way of life.
I wanted you, by the way, he's brought with him a really interesting musical instrument, and I'd like you to talk about it a little bit, but in the context of, I'm sorry, but I really am mining your website for interesting comments. But I particularly thought this was intriguing, because I think the intersection between music and art is fascinating. I know to my students are often intrigued by this, and it's particularly clear with many of the early 20th century modernist expressionists. But so you stated, I must create or play music to break the spell of fear and seriousness. And again, after years of teaching high school students, breaking the spell of fear and seriousness is actually one of the challenges of teaching high school, because you want to, on the one hand, a little bit of fear and seriousness is not entirely a bad thing, but it can become trapping. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I am a musician. I play the saxophones and flutes, and this tongue drum is something I created in my wood shop, but I love African music, and so it sounds like a marimba. It's basically a marimba in a box shape. But yeah, I could be serious in parts of my life, but when I'm playing music or painting a painting or in my wood shop, that really helps me stay salty. And I do a lot of things because I like the Renaissance man way of living. And I'm an avid farmer and gardener, and it's these things, they all inform each other for me. My art comes right out of that love of the land, right out of walking it or growing on it or working with it. So the seriousness, that doesn't exist anymore for me. I used to be worried about how was I going to make a living and that kind of thing. And I was a carpenter, and I built houses for many, many years, amongst other things. And finally, when I was at a crossroads, and I decided maybe I want to investigate a different career than building houses. That's when I got the download, so to speak, of just make beauty and it'll take care of your needs.
Play us a little something on your instrument. I thought this was very cool when he did this earlier. I love African music, and I thought this was very interesting.
Little old tongue drum. You're on candid camera. And there's a dolphin key, and this is what the dolphin key sounds like.
So you said this was difficult to tune, and I'll confess my ignorance. I have no idea how one would tune that sort of thing at all. So what do you do?
It's you make the top and the shapes, the tongues they're called, and then underneath you have to tune it. You have to bring it into, and so you're either taking wood away to make it a little higher, or you're adding weight to it.
Okay, so
and that's
sort of
when
like tightening or thickening strings or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's you can't. There's no formula. You just have to do it. And I use a computer tuner and hold the thing up and go duh. The problem is you get both keys the exact same note, and then you're in trouble. And I end up gluing nuts and bolts underneath. You should see what it looks like underneath. It's like an old counter in an old diner. You look underneath, and what do you see? Lots of bubble gum.
Now, something you're very interested in the Society of Six and the group of seven in Canada that was very influential there. These people very much emphasize creating art in a community. Is that your experience, or do you find it a more solitary enterprise for you?
Yeah. Those groups, they were, friends, artists. They'd live together. They would make big meals. They'd get drunk together. Down here, there's not that much of a collection like that of artists that I can identify. Although a lot of my friends are artists, but we're all back in our necks of the woods. But part of it, I think, is you bring your art out into the community, and people get to know you, and you get to know them. And lately, I've had a lot of commissions of people I've worked with, where they sit out in the wilderness, and then they ask me to paint a painting of where they sat because they had profound experience there. And to me, that's like the real humanistic beauty of art for me, that I'm selling my art out of my home for people that have worked with us. And instead of in a gallery and then your art just goes to somebody you don't know, or maybe your art matches the sofa. So I like the personal, and some of my great fans and admirers that have, they want to know the story of my art. Especially if they buy a painting, they want to know the whole story, and there's always a big, long story to them.
I know that when we've collected art, my husband and I, from this area, that knowing the place and knowing what drew people to it is always a lot of what excites us about an individual piece. Well, I have one last question, and then we're going to move to our next artist. But I was going to say, you should never have told me about the Society of Six, because it's very hard to take the teacher out of me. So I was reading about this. And so William Clapp, sort of the intellectual, as I could tell, leader of the group, made this statement, which I found obscure but intriguing. And he said, "We have much to express, but nothing to say."
Wow.
Is that a description of your art, or do you think he got...
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was thinking that might not be your philosophy.
Yeah. That's interesting, because they were they were at a time, they were before their time. They were unrecognized at the time, which kind of sad for me because the art is just fantastic. But
I mean, it may have been sort of an early Dada impulse or something, but I just found that intriguing, and because it seems to me that you were both expressing and saying in your art.
Yeah, I think maybe it's the art maybe asks a question. It's like, why do you like this view? How is this view that I'm painting? What's it doing to you? You know, and a lot of times it is the love of place. And I'm not sure if it's been a while since I've studied on the Society of Six. They lived in the Bay Area back in the old days, you know, in old shacks and stuff. But for me, I think the living on the land, close to the land, having experiences on the land, is much different out here in the desert than it is in the Bay Area.
How so? I'm just because I actually live in both places. We have a home in Palo Alto and a home in Grover. We've lived in Grover longer than we have in Palo Alto, and frankly like it better. Yeah. Sorry, Palo Alto.
It maybe has to do with the wildness, but for me, I've spent time wrangling, I've spent time working on a drill rig, I've spent time rowing the rivers. So my experiences come right out of those land-based things. It's different than when you're in an urban situation. I grew up in Hollywood, California, back in the 50s, and the kind of paintings I do don't come from that. Although I've just got a commission to paint the Santa Monica Pier, which, and it's funny because I used to go as a kid to the Santa Monica Pier and go up that rickety wooden, roller coaster ride. And so
I remember those rickety roller coasters from my youth too. Not that I ever got on it; I'm a total coward.
So I have stories already of the Santa Monica Pier, going there with my mother.
So you have something to say.
Stepping on bubblegum.
And on that note, I'm going to move on to our next artist, Diena. So why don't you come forward? And I'm very excited about this. She's an alpaca artist. I have a deep fondness for alpacas. We have some in our neighborhood on Miners Mountain Road. And she is a textile artist. But like everyone here, I think, has an interesting story of what brought her to this part of the world. You're all set with your mic, right? Great. So introduce yourself and talk a little bit about, we talked about this on the phone yesterday, a great story, and a fellow educator. So about, how we get to these corners of the world.
Right. I'm Diena Riddle, and my husband and I moved to Bicknell, and we live actually in Bicknell Bottoms, but the other end. We moved in 2015. So starting off a little bit.
The long version's great. Don't worry about it.
Okay. I'll back up a little bit. My grandparents, my dad actually was born in Bicknell and raised in Loa. So I did spend a lot of time at my grandparents' farm. My grandpa was a cow farmer. And so we had a little dairy there, and I spent lots of summers and was dropped off a lot in the summertime. So I loved Wayne County as a child. Hoped to marry a farmer, so I guess I ended up being kind of a farmer myself instead of marrying one. And that's okay, because I really enjoy what I'm doing. About 12 years ago, I started knitting. I asked my secretary at the time if she wanted, and she and I talked about let's start taking classes on knitting, and I said that sounded great. She never did, I did, and I went to the knitting shop in West Jordan, Utah. I bought some beautiful knitting needles, bought some yarn, it was okay yarn, and I said, would you show me how to cast on? Would you show me how to knit, purl? And I went ahead and did a little scarf, went back and said, will you show me how to cast off? and so I had a nice scarf.
The exit strategy.
Yeah. And then once in a while, when I had time, I went to a sit and knit during the week, because as a school principal, you don't have that much spare time that I could count on. I really enjoyed knitting, and my husband, the sweet man that he is, he went to the knit shop and said, "I'd like to buy Diena something really special. Do you have some yarn that I could spoil her with?" So he came home and gave me a skein of alpaca yarn that was just to die for, and that was the beginning of my rabbit hole. I got online and I started Googling alpacas, and the yarn was just so yummy, I'm going to say. I fell in love with alpacas just online. I'd have maybe a rough day at school, and getting online in some spare time and just looking at the alpacas and seeing their faces just really...
I know. I go down to look at the alpacas too, just to have their wonderful faces
calmed
looking
me
back.
down, and I eventually got some courage and talked my husband into taking me to a couple alpaca ranches. Took our granddaughters, and we went to see some in person. And what he remembers, I remember just falling in love with them and just connecting. They were, I thought, like my spirit animal. He remembers, as we drove away, I had tears rolling down my eyes. So that was really the start of thinking about them and talking about them more. My teachers do remember me talking about alpacas even before that I really loved them, but that was really getting the ball rolling. So talking about it led to going to another alpaca ranch and getting a little deeper into this. I had double knee replacement surgery, and my surgeon at the time said, "Diena, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?" And at that point, I was really happy doing what I was doing, never being a person that I counted down the days to the end of the school year or figuring out how long I was going to be doing what I was doing, because I thoroughly loved being in the education field. Loved it. But that did plant a little seed, so I did look at my options, and I did have enough years in that I could retire. So, if I can...
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I was actually going to encourage you to, why don't you show some of your art to people?
Well, Mother's Day 2015, my husband gave me this little, this is my artifacts, gave me this and this little halter and said, "Diena, let's do it." So, yes, so this got us deeper. I contacted one of the ranches, and it actually went into her spam folder. But she checked her spam folder, and Carol contacted me, and we made an appointment. We met with her. We bought 5 female alpacas, and I'm still a school principal. We're still living in South Jordan.
So where did you put the alpacas?
Well, she kept them. We picked out the herd sires. We had them bred, and she would keep them until they were confirmed pregnant. And so the clock was ticking. Mike and I had camped down here a lot. Our family had camped down here. We loved it here. We actually had purchased a small home in Bicknell that we called our camping house. We would come down in the spring. We would close it up in the fall, because I was a principal at a year-round school. And we decided, yes, we would actually do it, because we owned 5 girls. We lived on a 3rd acre in South Jordan. I let my principal know my superintendent know we had to give a 2-month notice. So I did do that. I let my faculty know, called them in, sent a notice out to my parents, and my superintendent met with me. Everyone felt I was having a nervous breakdown. Who on earth would retire to Wayne County, Utah to raise alpacas? My assistant superintendent came and spent lots of time with me too, and trying to help me past my nervous breakdown. And
Psychotherapy rather than alpacas.
Yes.
Okay.
And really, we felt like this was the right thing to do. So we did it. We found this home. It had been on the market for a while, 8.5 acres, beautiful home. Everything and more that we could want. We had to sell our house still. And anyway,
Well, so describe what you're doing now, because I've already told
Yes,
them I'm going to show up
yeah.
with my grandchildren
okay, yeah.
this Christmas.
So what we do now is we had 5 alpacas. We have 31 alpacas now. So time flies and things move on. I am. I'm not a what am I? I'm a lover of alpacas, a mother of alpacas. I'm living the dream. I'm living the dream.
So how has your art evolved as you've gotten to understand the yarn better?
I had started knitting. I had never spun yarn. My dream was to get a spinning wheel. So for Christmas, the day after Christmas, my spinning wheel from New Zealand arrived. I wanted to have the very nicest spinning wheel I could have so that I could start as a novice and as an expert and have a very nice one. Came from New Zealand. Through YouTube, we learned how to spin together. I believed that it was in my genes that I could pick it up easily. It just is in my fingers. I can do it.
Was there a tradition of spinning in your family that you know of?
Nope, not that I know of, but I think it's in my Dutch roots.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel it. I feel each of my alpacas has a different personality with their fleece, and I can really feel their fleece, and I can tell you who it is, who it belongs to. They each the fleece tells me if it wants to be thick or thin. It's so interesting.
So why don't you introduce us to
know
some
that.
of your works over here? This
Okay.
is,
What I love about working with the alpacas is that I know them, they know me. I discover new things all the time with them. With the knitting, I started spinning, like I said, in the January. You have to invest in the tools. So I started spinning, and then I had like a bolt of single ply, and then you get another ply. And then I asked a mentor, well, now what do you do? Oh, now you buy another tool. So it's called Lazy Kate, and then you put the two together. Oh, okay. So I had to drive to Kanosh to find out how you do that. So then you get a Nitty Naughty, and then you put that together to get a skein of yarn. And so I've just learned slowly how to do each little thing. So I make yarn. This is one that I entered in the Wayne County Fair, and I got a beautiful gold ribbon for this. But the ribbons don't matter. It's just exploring and seeing how creative and how much fun you can have with what they give you. This was from Miss Lillian, Melvin, Nora June, and Alpaca Chino. So it was from 4 of my alpacas.
and what will you make into that? Do you know?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd love you to just feel it. And
This
pass
is the
it
one
around.
I really love.
Yeah.
Look at those colors.
This one is from Chantilly Lace, or Lacey, and she's no longer with us, but it is just so much fun to get a pot and put it on my stove and see what colors I can come up with. And I don't ever keep my recipes because I want everyone to be unique, and sometimes I'll put 3 skeins of yarn in, sometimes I'll put 4. The most I've done is 7 in one pot, but I never want any skein of yarn to be the same. I just want it always to be different. This last 2 weeks ago, one of my alpaca friends actually showed an afterbirth from her little cria, or baby alpaca that was born. And so I did a batch of yarn that was all around the colors from the afterbirth. It was the most beautiful batch of yarn. It was just wonderful. This is from one of my alpacas, and I'll actually have, this is a bra from her, and then this is carded. So it's the same, this is cleaned and carded, I should say. So I can pass that around. Alpaca is 3 times warmer than wool, and it's water repellent and fire retardant. It just has so many beautiful qualities. But each alpaca has its own qualities too. I'll pass this around. This is one that I prepared with my carder, and then I did some felted soaps. So this is goat milk soap that I felted.
So explain what felting means.
Felting is making the fibers adhere together so that they are not going to go anywhere. So like this bar of soap is having a
soapy washcloth.
yeah, like a washcloth.
Yeah.
So if you're camping or something, you just have your own washcloth. And then you put it on a rack so that it dries, so it doesn't get mushy or anything. But it's just so fun. Like, it's just so fun to learn new things all the time. Where it is. This is something that I just did this week. So this is something new.
Just this week?
Yeah, that I just tried. So this is wet felting, and it's on a linen scarf, and I just wanted to try it for this, for you guys tonight. It's definitely not perfect, but
No, it's very beautiful.
thank you. But I want you just even to try to do this, just to see how yummy it feels. It just, I mean, just to sit on a sofa and just.
And I assume you did the scarf around your neck, which is stunning.
I did.
Yeah, it's
I did.
beautiful. I love those
And
colors.
this is alpaca and some acrylic in here, but it's just a fun little accent piece.
Well, this is great. I think I'm actually using up too much time, so we should move to our third art. That was
Okay.
wonderful, and I'm hoping
Okay.
there'll be some questions.
Yep.
So our third artist,
Thank you.
Steve.
Thanks, Diena, for passing around.
Yeah, that's great. I know we all want a stroke. I've already done that. I was fiddling around with her stuff before we began. So introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your story, because everybody has a story about how they end up here.
My name's Steve Jorgensen. I grew up and lived most of my life in the Salt Lake area, and almost 50 years I spent living and working at one of Utah's ski areas. And in the springtime, when the resorts would close, everybody would head to the desert. It didn't matter. It just had to be south of I-70, I think. But on one of our trips down in the late 70s, we stopped to visit one of our good friend and neighbors who coincidentally lived in Bicknell Bottoms. And he said, "Have you ever been to the park?" And we go, "What park?" And so we all jumped in his giant Ford LTD and came into the park, and we were hooked. We were hooked. And my children grew up with red sand in their britches, so we spent a lot of time down here, and we come every year. Every year.
So why don't you show us, we've been looking at people, so why don't you show us a little bit about your work, and maybe, I thought these were particularly fascinating. My husband and I love rock art, and but the technique for this I find extremely interesting.
So this is just, they refer to it as lino cut. And yes, they still do make linoleum. But there are a lot of new substitutes on the market. But I find it a very recreational form of art for me.
Why?
I get to use my hands. I get in to carve.
So it's tactile.
It's more industrial than sitting with a brush. and creating. You're actually digging into your subject.
So these are the model here. So this is, I found this really interesting. It's
And these
easier
are the
to
blocks. Some are mounted, some are not mounted. They're just pre-cut. And you can buy giant sheets of this stuff. And what it did, it taught me to see in reverse. Because when you're carving, you have to do a reverse image. Just like printing. You're printing a reverse image. And which sometimes you forget. And you can't fix it. You can't go back. So I find it a very enjoyable form of art. And I am represented locally in the old house on Center and Main Gallery. So
as is Diena, and
Not.
now too, okay. So this is this is all art you can see here.
So and I was also asked to talk a little bit about watercolor, but since we're down here for the Utah Watercolor Society Art in the Park, it's like preaching to the choir.
No, but we're not all the choir here. So because I think it's interesting that watercolor seems to be such an important medium here. I mean, to me, it kind of seems like an oil place with the deep, vibrant colors, and yet the watercolors are so. Why watercolor?
So for me, watercolor is the most manipulative medium, and for me, it's easy. I don't judge a medium by oil color is easier than watercolor is. It's just a different technique and a different surface, but I really enjoy it, and you can manipulate those colors on the paper with water. It's just amazing.
Is there something about the light here that seems particularly good for watercolor? I'm just
The
curious.
light's always changing.
Yeah.
And so it's you really have to capture it in the moment, and sometimes you pick a subject where the light's moving faster than your brush, and it's hard to catch up.
So talk a little bit, because I'm not sure everybody here would know. But so how does this event work? I mean, because you're actually participating,
Right.
as one of the artists. Tell us what you do. You'll see some of the results, especially if you show up for the event tomorrow. But
So for me, I'm familiar and I'm comfortable with Capitol Reef and Torrey in the area. We've been coming here for almost 50 years, and so it's not an unknown subject. And I can plan in advance mentally where I'm going to paint.
and how do you choose?
And what subject? Just, I've done this quite a few years, so I like to paint in a different place, and so I'll choose a place down on the river, in the park, out through the orchard, just down the scenic road.
Are there any squabbles between artists? I want this section of the river, or do you all?
No, I don't think so. But I know I have been in place when another artist walked up and was disappointed. So
We felt that way about campsites sometimes. I think all of us have.
It was kind of like fishing, you get to your favorite hole and there's somebody.
Well, the rule of thumb is they're always catching more fish than you do,
Well.
at least in my experience. But I'm not very good. So.
So we really enjoy it. We really enjoy coming down.
Well, I'm cutting you a little short, which isn't fair because everybody's been so interesting. But do we have any questions from our online listeners?
Let me check. So Emily Ruth has a question for Niles and wants to know the difference whether he composes his own music or do you like traditional music?
If you could go to that mic
Yeah.
and then answer those, see you too.
And I'm going to make a confession here. Emily Ruth is our daughter, who wanted to watch this, but is a very talented musician. So it's a genuine question.
So, I am an improviser. I have no formal training, and I play the saxophone and flutes and conga drums and marimbas and stuff like that. But so it didn't come to me through a family or education. It's just I've had a couple of bands when I was living in Moab and tried to play African type music or reggae when reggae was really popular. And so, yeah, if the music's good, then I can play. And if the music's not so good, then I kind of be quiet.
How about from our group here? Does anyone have a question for our artists? Oh.
I wanted to ask our alpaca artist
He's got the microphone.
about the dyes. Oh,
Thanks, Michael.
but where's the fabric?
Right. Then they'll hear you online too.
I wanted to ask our alpaca artist about dyes. What dyes do you use?
I usually use commercial dyes, professional dyes. I have used I've used avocado pits, and I've used Kool-Aid. I've used
I love that.
yeah, I have used Easter egg pellets. I've used Wilton food coloring dyes. I've actually dyed in the microwave with snow, in the sun in mason jars. I've dyed just out, all sorts of ways. But lately I've been dyeing on my stove. And with our altitude, I have to use an electric range. I can't use propane because I cannot read my dye. I can't bring it to the right heat level. I can't bring the bubbles just right. So it has to be electric.
I have one for Steve. Steve, I love to watch you paint each year, and the way that you use blacks and tans in your art is really amazing, because in my mind I think of black and tan as kind of harsh and a little bit sharp, but in your paintings they seem to be soft and somehow a little bit three-dimensional, like you could touch it and it would feel like the real earth. And I'm curious what paints you use and how you lay down that paint, and because of the effect that you get.
I'm not really a brand person. I'll buy a color or a pigment that suits my need. Unlike my oil paints, I paint with a limited palette with oil paints with 9 colors. But with watercolor, I've got whatever I need, and I'll purchase whatever I need. But it's just the way the water flows. I've even had different types of water produce a different result on the paper. So,
Why only 9 oil colors?
just a limited palette.
Is that an artistic choice on your part? It's presumably there are lots of oil colors available.
Yeah, but then you don't have 3 shelves of oil paints you don't use like I do. I just have 9 colors. I buy the same colors. It improved my mixing technique, made it stronger, and I can go back to a painting later and actually mix that same color easier because I'm not dealing with a lot of different
Do
different
many
pigments.
oil painters follow that? I mean, that intrigues me.
Yeah. It's the palette that I adopted was Edgar Payne, California artist. Did a lot of Western art, Maynard Dixon type art. So, but his art kind of simulated what I'd like to do, and so I kind of followed his palette.
I don't think you learned something new. I didn't really realize that people picked a palette like that. That's very interesting. Other questions?
It creates harmony. You forgot that one.
Oh, okay.
Steve, you might want to tell the audience how many layers you have on those prints, because I think people just think that you print one and that's it, but those are multiples.
So this one kind of shows it. I have a very primitive register for the paper. So the paper sets in the exact same place, you hope, on every print. So I'll make 30 prints, 50 prints. Maybe 40% of them will turn out, and even less than that will be marketable that I'd put out. I give a lot of them away, but I'll register that paper and I'll use different layers.
So is it a multi-step process? Maybe I think.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you explain it just a little bit? This is interesting.
So
because I think it's much more complicated than people realize. That was a great question, I thought.
So you have to pick the color of the paper that you're going to use, or what color you're going to paint the paper or ink the paper, and that's your base. And here it's a light tan, and then I'll mix up different colors. Try to not copy the terrain where these pictographs came from, but being artsy, what's going to be attractive, and I'll lay different layers on there. I've done a loss reduction where you carve the block out each successive color, and I've done as many as 13 colors. And it's not so much like the Japanese block prints where they make a different block for each color. And
that's what I was wondering about. I think I asked you that.
Yeah, which I can't imagine how they do that. And you watch them. They just lay the paper down and make their print, but it takes them years to make one print, and it doesn't take me that long. So I was doing it for fun, and then I found an opportunity down here to share my art, and so I come down a few times a year, and
do you ever do cards?
I have done cards.
Yeah, it just looks like it would be a beautiful card
cards.
Technique.
So it's labor intensive. It's labor intensive. So.
Any other questions? Well, I think we can draw this to a close. Again, I want to emphasize that this spectacular Arts in the Park event finishes up. And actually, I realized I didn't say the times, beginning at 4:30, is that correct? At a place. You can buy tickets on entradainstitute.org, entradainstitute.org, and a great opportunity to support the Entrada Institute, our very talented artists, and to see some great things. And by the way, to eat and drink wonderfully at a place, which is one of our splendid new local establishments run by another Entrada Institute board member. So thank you very much for coming. Let's applaud our splendid artists. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us. That was great. You all were wonderful. This was so fun.